If you want to make somebody fall in love with you, like if you want to be able to seduce somebody, it's easier if you don't like them. This is also why some people use flirtation as a kind of power or as a kind of like, I don't know, as a kind of way to get people to do things for them. They know that they can use their appeal to manipulate others into wanting to please them or appeal to them. And yet, this isn't how you actually seduce anybody. You can't just play the game. If you treat seduction like a con artist, like you're trying to trick people or fool them, then you're the one who's going to get fooled. Instead, seduction is about the small things. It's about listening. It's about showing an active interest in other people. It's being able to show your own enthusiasms, to be able to make the other person feel safe. That's seduction. Okay, here's a super simple and I think very important sign that you're going to be happy in your relationship. And it's sort of criminally underrated, at least in my experience. And it comes from the German poet Rilke. He says that being in a happy relationship, like a sign of a good relationship, is that essentially you become introverts together. He puts it more poetically. He says that true love is when two solitudes meet and guard each other's solitude. And it's perfect, right? Because a sign of being happy and in love is that you don't need to be elsewhere. You don't need other people to entertain you. It's like you've become a world unto yourself. You could literally just enjoy each other's company, like having a meal in the other person's presence and the food tastes better. Or you watch a movie together and the lines are funnier. Suddenly life seems brighter and more rich because you've created a cave in which there is only your love. You become mutual best friends and you're introverted in your love. That's a sign of happiness. Two solitudes that guard each other. Okay, here's a super simple and I think crucial sign that you're going to be in a happy relationship. It comes from the German philosopher Adorno, who says, "Geliebt wirst du einzig, wo du schwach dich zeigen darfst," which means you can only be loved in a place where you feel like you can be vulnerable. Like finding somebody who makes you feel safe, who makes you feel understood and accepted, finding somebody who doesn't expect you to be perfect, who simply wants to be with you even if you're having a bad day, that is so fundamental to love. You are loved where you can feel vulnerable. Men fear being laughed at by a woman. Women fear being killed by a man. It's a great line from the author Margaret Atwood from, for example, The Handmaid's Tale. What she means is that men fear emasculation. Women fear the wrath of emasculated men. And this is also why women know perfectly well that to secure their own safety, they have to flatter the male fragile ego, to laugh at their jokes, even if they're terrible, to not ever make men feel uncomfortable, to always make sure that the man feels like he is the one in charge. And yet, this is not what real masculinity is. Masculinity is being able to make a woman feel safe. It's being able to make a woman feel comfortable, like she can laugh. Not at you, but with you. The single most important thing in every relationship is communication. Like, I cannot possibly stress this enough. Communication is so important. And yet, sometimes it's not enough to have communicated. Sometimes you have to communicate again. There's that great line from George Bernard Shaw where he says that the biggest mistake in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. Which means that just because you think you said something or just because you think you made something clear doesn't always mean that it registered with your partner and vice versa. That means that good communication in a relationship is really just about managing miscommunication. It's about having the kindness and patience to be willing to express yourself and to learn how to express yourself well. That if you want to have a happy, healthy relationship, you have to say, I want to learn how to communicate with you. It's all about communication. That is how you love. If you've ever had a day off and you've struggled to enjoy it, then this quote is for you. It comes from Kafka. He says, I find this very beautiful. He says, I am free and therefore I am lost. By which he means that freedom can become its own paralysis, can become its own burden. That you could have a day off and you could do anything, and yet you still feel like you haven't done enough. That part of being alive is that we don't really know what to do with ourselves. We're always looking for something that we think will fulfill us or complete us. That our freedom is both a curse and a blessing. That it is up to you to make something of your life. And that yet, the fact that you could do anything or be anything becomes almost like an overwhelming responsibility. And that loneliness is what Kafka describes when he says, I am free and therefore I am lost. Here's a very simple and yet super important sign that you found true love. And it comes from the French existentialist philosopher Sartre. He says, commitment is an act, not a word. What he means is that you can't just talk the talk. You have to walk the walk. And in a relationship, you have to find somebody who's willing to struggle with you, not to be with you, but to build with you. That means somebody who shares a vision and a goal. Somebody who sees the long term ahead with you. Somebody who isn't just in love for 5 minutes. Somebody who wants to be in love for 5 years and beyond. And so having a long-term commitment to somebody means saying, I want to build something that is greater than the two of us. Something that we could only achieve together. It's a shared vision, a shared goal, what the German poet Brecht called the third thing. Something that you share with that person that you think is worth fighting for. An overarching commitment. That's the... If you've ever been in a relationship where you worry that you love them more than they love you, here's a line from the poet W.H. Auden that might help you. He says, if no equal affection there can be, then let the one who loves you more be me. And what he means is that we fundamentally never really know what's going on in the mind of somebody else, or let alone in somebody else's heart. That rather than questioning how somebody else feels about us, we should be secure in the love that we feel for them. That love is not a competition. Love is repetition. Finding new and different ways each and every day to express your love and realizing that different people love differently. And so you don't have to worry about whether or not they love you, as long as you are secure in your love for them. If no equal affection there can be, let the one who loves you more be me. Men watch women. Women don't watch men. Women watch other women. It's super interesting, right? Like, guys literally can't help themselves. They'll be walking down the street and a woman passes and they'll like crane their neck just to catch a glimpse of that woman. And yet women don't do the same to men. In fact, women are much more likely to check out other women. It's like if you're walking down the street and there's a couple and like the woman's holding the guy's hand and you come across another woman, she'll not be looking at the guy. She'll be checking out the woman. Women check each other out. And so why do they do this? There's a great line from the art critic John Berger. He says, men watch women. Women watch themselves being looked at. And it's such an interesting idea, right? Because what he means is that women know that they're the objects of the so-called male gaze. And so they'll be judging and looking at other women to see how they're seen, to see themselves. Sometimes you have to let people go. It's one of the hardest things in life, especially in a relationship. Realizing that the best thing you can do for somebody is to let them go. There's this beautiful line from the poet W.H. Auden where he says, if no equal affection there can be, then let the one who loves you more be me. And that means that you have to be the person who loves the other so much that you're willing to see and to realize and to recognize that their love is not meant for you, that they're meant for somebody else. And that's so devastating and difficult, and yet if you have the courage to let somebody go, it means that you will find somebody who can love you in a way that you deserve to be loved. And so the most difficult and yet most important thing is realizing that if somebody doesn't love you right, that you are under no obligation to stay with them just because you love them more. Let them go instead. Did you know that Tolstoy was one of the first authors to write about pretty privilege? There's a great passage where he writes, it is amazing how absolute is the delusion that beauty is goodness. And he's writing a scene in which he says, a man, when speaking to a beautiful woman, doesn't actually care what she says. He'll simply agree with her, even if she's speaking nonsense or saying something abhorrent. Now, of course, it's a bit reductive, right? It
essentially repeats the trope that men want women for their looks, not for their mind, which I believe to be patently untrue. I think nothing is more attractive than an intelligent, eloquent person, no matter if they're a man or a woman. In fact, I think that intelligence makes people more attractive. And yet, what Tolstoy is saying is that we judge people differently depending on their looks. We give them a pass if they're attractive, and we judge them harshly if they're not. Here's a clear sign that you are in love. And it's actually something that is surprisingly painful and yet very common. And it starts with a doubt about whether or not they really love you back. Do they love you in the same manner in which you love them? Can the intensity of your feeling be reciprocated by somebody whose heart you will never fully know or understand? This is one of the key insecurities of love, right? Saying, I don't know whether or not you really love me. It's also why the French psychoanalyst Lacan said that the most dangerous question in any relationship is, do you love me? Because even if they say yes, you might start to suspect that they're just saying it to make you happy. Now, the poet W.H. Auden has a beautiful line about this. He says, if equal affection there cannot be, then let the one who loves you more be me. And that should be your response. Don't question their love. Be confident and secure about your love for them. You know it's true love when it hurts. It's like that line from Shakespeare where he says that it's better to have loved and lost than not to have loved at all. And what he means is that even though the price we pay for love is pain, that it is totally worth it. It's like even in the perfect relationship where you make each other happy, you know that someday it's all going to end. That the more precious something is in life, the more finite it is. And that thereby the greater the love is, the greater the suffering will be someday when you lose them. It's a really difficult and dark insight that pain is the price we pay for love. And yet the greater pain, and this is what Shakespeare has in mind, the greater pain would be not to have loved, not to have made yourself vulnerable, not to have explored yourself and somebody else. That accepting love means accepting future pain. And thereby, one of the greatest experiences of life that we have has to be enjoyed to the fullest. You have to enjoy every second of being together with your loved one because you know that someday it will be over. And we do our very best to pretend like that won't happen, but it will. And so always keep in mind that the person that you love is precious in the same way that time is precious. And that the greater your love is, the greater the pain will be, and that yet it is precisely therefore worth having loved and lived it. Better to have loved and lost than not to have loved at all. Surround yourself with people who talk about the things they love, not the ones who complain about the things they hate. Like, this is actually a key aspect of friendship to me, is that we often surround ourselves with people we think are our friends, but really they're just people we enjoy complaining with. It's like your coworkers. Do you really know them, or you just enjoy complaining together? Now, obviously, sometimes it's good to talk about your feelings, the things you're struggling with. And yet, I think fundamentally that if you want to be happy, if you want to be optimistic and curious, you have to surround yourself with people who love what they do, who love talking about the things that they like doing. Like, enthusiasm is so much more powerful than resentment and complaining. And that hate is the curiosity killer. And as soon as you kill curiosity, it means that you've already given up upon yourself because you've given up upon the world. And so surround yourself with people who don't just complain. Surround yourself with people who enjoy talking about the things they love. Simple, and yet I think super important. How do you know if you're good or evil? There's an interesting theory about this that I think you might enjoy. It's pretty easy to understand. Basically, it works like this. The person who is evil is the person who believes themselves to be absolutely good. In other words, if you're convinced that you occupy the moral high ground and that your adversary is the embodiment of all that is bad in the world, you thereby have become one of the bad guys. That the definition of evil is someone who believes themselves to be wholly good. And it's interesting, right? Because essentially what it's arguing is that life is more complex than good or evil. Bad guys versus good guys. That the very attempt to simplify and to break the world down into a binary juxtaposition of good versus evil is a kind of ideological false consciousness. And so the best way to be good is to see the complexity within evil itself, and vice versa. I have a pretty simple theory about men that I think can help you become, for lack of a better word, a better man.
And it also tells us something about masculinity. But basically, here's how it works. And like I said, it's quite simple. Psychology tells us that we fear that which we do not understand, which thereby, by definition, is that we fear the thing that we do not know. Now, most men don't grow up around women. Apart from their mother and perhaps a sibling, they don't tend to have a lot of female friends. This means that the manner in which men learn about women tends to come through stereotypes on TV or in video games. Stereotypes that turn women into a very masculine or perhaps even misogynistic idea of what women are. Namely, highly sexualized beings that contain within them some inner core or secret that cannot be understood by men. It's a common joke that men can't figure women out. And in the same way that psychology tells us that we fear that which we do not understand, we also resent that which we fear. And so a lot of men fearing emasculation from women, fearing rejection from women, actually start to resent women. And it's two sides of the same coin. They idolize women as these inscrutable sacred objects, and yet thereby resent them. And so if you want to be a better man, have more female friends. Learn about women. Stop fearing them.